The sound of Elsie's muffled sobs greeted me as I stepped into Derek and Marlene's house to celebrate my granddaughter's 12th birthday. My heart sank. Those weren't the joyful cries of a happy child. I followed the noise down the hallway to a room with a steel door, no decorations adorning its cold surface. "Derek? Marlene?" I called out, knocking firmly. No response. I pressed my ear against the unforgiving metal. Elsie's whimpers grew louder, intermingled with the familiar scratching of pencil against paper. Using the spare key Derek had given me, I unlocked the door. The sight before me ignited a fire of rage within. My sweet Elsie sat hunched over a piano keyboard, red-eyed and frazzled. The room was dimly lit and lined wall-to-wall with music sheets, like a prison cell designed to strip her of creativity and joy. "Elsie!" I gasped, darting to her side. She flinched, her listless gaze slowly meeting mine. "Honey, what's going on? Are you okay?" Before she could respond, the door burst open. Marlene stood fuming, her face contorted into a scowl that sent shivers down my spine. "What are you doing in here?" she growled, snatching Elsie by the arm and wrenching her away from me. "I told you not to disturb her practice," Elsie whimpered, trembling in Marlene's vice-like grip. "But Grandma—" "Silence!" Marlene's shrill voice silenced her pleading cry. "You know the rules. No distractions until you've perfected this piece." "Marlene, that's enough!" I stepped forward, shielding Elsie with my body. "What kind of hellish prison is this? She's just a child, for God's sake." Marlene's glare could have melted steel. "Stay out of this, Mother. You're too soft on her. Elsie has a gift, and I'll do whatever it takes to nurture it." By locking her away like a caged animal, look at her, Marlene. She's absolutely miserable. Tough love is necessary to achieve greatness, something you never understood with Derek. She spat the words like venom. "I won't let Elsie squander her talents like her father did. Not on my watch." My blood boiled, but I refused to engage her twisted rationalization. Keeping my tone measured, I turned to my trembling granddaughter. "Elsie, sweetheart, go wait in the living room. I need to have a talk with your mother." Elsie hesitated, her eyes pleading for an escape hatch. But Marlene's iron glare subdued her momentary courage. With a defeated sigh, she slumped out of that wretched room, not even bothering to grab her belongings. As the door clicked shut, I wheeled on Marlene, aiming my fiercest look straight into her delusional eyes. "How dare you treat her this way? Have you lost your mind?" Marlene scoffed, folding her arms defiantly. "I'm giving her the training, the discipline that she needs to become a world-class pianist, something you could never comprehend." "And at what cost?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Her childhood? Her happiness? You're stealing her spirit away, piece by piece." "Don't be so dramatic." She rolled her eyes. "I'm doing what's best for her future success. Unlike you, I'm not going to let my child's potential go to waste." Her words stung, dredging up past failures I thought I'd buried long ago. But this wasn't about me or my shortcomings. It was about protecting Elsie. I steeled my resolve, meeting Marlene's contemptuous glare with unwavering determination. "If you think for 1 second that I'll stand by while you crush that poor girl's soul, you're gravely mistaken. This ends now." The battle lines were drawn. As Marlene and I stared each other down in that dimly lit chamber of horrors, I knew there would be no turning back. For Elsie's sake, I had to fight and win. After my confrontation with Marlene, I stormed out of that cursed house, my mind racing. How could she treat Elsie that way? My own granddaughter, sobbing and imprisoned like a common criminal? The thought made me ill. In the days that followed, I did some digging into Marlene's past. What I uncovered explained a lot about her twisted motivations. Marlene came from an affluent family with a reputation for musical excellence to uphold. Her own mother, a celebrated concert pianist, had groomed her relentlessly as a prodigy from a young age. The pressure crushed Marlene's passion, but she dutifully followed the path laid out for her, until she faltered during a career-defining recital at Juilliard. That failure shattered her psyche, and her family promptly disowned her in disgrace. The revelation crushed her dreams and her spirit. She spent years drifting aimlessly until meeting my son Derek. Somehow, the strength and stability Derek provided helped Marlene regain her sense of purpose. But the wounds of her childhood never healed. Her obsession with molding Elsie into the musical icon she could never become only grew more ravenous, more unhinged. I knew then that if I didn't act fast, Marlene would rob Elsie of her very identity. A few days later, I invited myself over again, this time with the pretense of a family chat. As expected, Marlene treated me with icy disdain, but I refused to back down. "You can't treat Elsie like a circus animal forever," I scolded her in the living room. "She's a growing girl who needs freedom, friends, sunshine." Marlene rolled her eyes. "Don't start with your sentimental crap again. All that matters is hardening Elsie's focus, eliminating distractions. That's the only way she'll reach her full potential." "By destroying her spirit?" I cried incredulously. On cue, Elsie shuffled in looking ragged and exhausted. "There you are, lazy bones," Marlene snapped. "Get over here and show Grandma how far we've come." The haunted look in my granddaughter's eyes as she took her place at the piano keys will forever be seared into my brain. Slowly, mechanically, she began playing an intricate Mozart piece with cold, clinical precision. Not an ounce of passion or joy flowed from those nimble fingers. When she finished, Marlene turned to me with a triumphant smirk. "You see, perfection takes sacrifice. That's something your pathetic son could never grasp." Before I could object, Elsie suddenly collapsed into a fit of shuddering sobs. In a flash, I was at her side, cradling the poor girl as she cried into my chest. "Please." "No more," she whimpered between ragged breaths. I can't do this anymore." My blood boiled over as I glared at the vile woman towering over us. "Are you happy now, you wretched hag? Look at what you've done to her." Marlene's face flushed a deep crimson, her lips curling into a sneer of pure contempt. "How dare you let sentiment cloud your judgment? I'll not have my daughter grow up to be a quitter like the rest of your loser family." I saw red. Before I could stop myself, I stood and charged at Marlene, my hands coiled into trembling fists. "You evil, miserable Hey!" A booming voice froze me mid-lunge. Derek barreled into the room, grabbing me by the shoulders. "What in the hell is going on here?" As my son stared at me in shock and confusion, I knew I had to make him see the truth. If I didn't, Marlene's torment of Elsie would never end. I couldn't fail now, not when my granddaughter's future was at stake. Steeling my nerves, I turned to Derek and uttered the words I'd been dreading. "Your wife is abusing your daughter." Derek stood frozen, his mouth agape as my accusation hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Marlene wasted no time trying to regain control of the situation. "Don't listen to her ramblings, dear," she purred, slithering up to Derek with serpentine charm. "You know how emotional your mother can get. She's just jealous of Elsie's talents." "Jealous?" I sputtered, my rage bubbling over. "You twisted, delusional snake! I'm trying to protect my granddaughter from your psychotic abuse." Derek's brow furrowed in confusion as he looked from me to Marlene and back again. "Abuse? What are you talking about, Mom?" "Open your eyes, son," I pleaded, gesturing to the disheveled, cowering form of Elsie still crumpled on the floor. "Look at what your wife's training has done to that sweet child." A glimmer of clarity crept across Derek's face as he absorbed the heart-wrenching scene before him. But Marlene swiftly snuffed it out with a theatrical display of motherly affection. Sweeping over to Elsie, she scooped the quivering girl into a tight embrace. There, Pumpkin, don't listen to Grandma's scary stories. Mommy just wants what's best for her little star." Derek's jaw clenched as he warred with the conflicting realities vying for his trust. In that moment, I realized the true insidiousness of Marlene's manipulations. I had to break through at all costs. "That's enough of your lies," I bellowed, startling them both. Reaching into my pocket, I revealed the sleek phone I had purposely left recording audio during our confrontation. "You hear that, Derek? I have proof of the vile way your witch of a wife treats your daughter." My voice dripped with a mixture of fury and triumph as realization crept across Marlene's twisted features. You had no right," she seethed through gritted teeth. "Every right," I shot back with righteous fury. "As her grandmother, I'll do whatever it takes to protect Elsie from your madness." Derek stood shell-shocked as Marlene and I faced off, tremors of rage rolling off us both in palpable waves. Finally, my son found his voice. "Mother," he said in a tone that brokered no argument, "show me what you have on that recording. Now." My heart soared with vindication as I eagerly played back the device. Marlene's harrowing threats and insults filled the room in lurid detail as poor Elsie wept and pleaded for mercy. Derek's face drained of color as the truth burrowed into his consciousness. When the clips ended, a heavy silence blanketed us all. Nobody dared break it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Derek moved toward Marlene with grim determination. "Get out," he said in a low, dangerous rumble. Marlene blinked, her mouth forming a shocked O. "What?" "You heard me," Derek growled through gritted teeth. "I want you out of this house. Tonight. I'll make arrangements for Elsie and send for your things later." But Derek," Marlene sputtered, her mask of regal confidence melting away as panic set in. "You can't be serious. It's all a misunderstanding." Derek's face twisted into an expression of pure disgust and loathing. "Save it. I'm done being blinded by your manipulations. What kind of mother terrorizes their own child like that?" His words lanced deep, a killing blow to Marlene's delusional charade. She opened her mouth as if to protest further, but seemed to think better of it. With a final, hateful glare in my direction, she stormed out of the room. Elsie watched her mother's retreat with a strange, hollow look, as if awakening from a long, tumultuous dream. Derek pulled her close, cradling his daughter's fragile form while I looked on with bittersweet relief. The worst was over, or so I thought at the time. But the battle to secure Elsie's freedom had only just begun. In the days following Marlene's explosive exit, an uneasy calm settled over Derek's household. Elsie roamed the home in a daze, as if emerging from a years-long trance. Simple pleasures like playing outside or watching cartoons seemed novel concepts to her. Derek tried valiantly to make up for lost time, but his demanding job often pulled him away, leaving me to pick up the pieces and guide my wounded granddaughter back to normalcy. It wasn't easy. Years of Marlene's toxic manipulations had taken their toll, but I was determined to help Elsie rediscover the joy and freedom she deserved. Our neighbor Simon Hayes proved an unexpected ally in that mission. A kindly divorced man who lived 2 doors down, Simon had quietly observed the troubling patterns at Derek's home for years. I had my suspicions something wasn't right over there, he told me one morning as we sipped coffee on his patio. But every time I tried getting close to Elsie, that psycho wife of Derek's would chase me off like a mangy dog. I shuddered, remembering Marlene's fierce territorial instincts when it came to protecting Elsie from outside influences. Well, she's out of the picture now, for good, I hope. Simon's expression turned grave. "You know it won't be that easy, right? Women like that don't just slink away quietly." His ominous words sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, Elsie bounded over, her face alight for the first time in ages. "Grandma, Mr. Simon, can I go explore the creek today?" She bounced on her toes with pent-up energy, reminding me so vividly of her joy-filled younger self. "Of course, sweetie," I beamed, pulling her into a bear hug. "Just be back before dinner, okay?" She grinned and scampered off, grabbing a sketch pad and colored pencils on her way out. A familiar pang tugged at my heart as I watched her go. How many other childhood memories had that evil woman stolen from my grandbaby? "You got lucky, you know." Simon's gruff voice pulled me from my brooding. Having proof of what that psycho was doing, I nodded soberly. "Believe me, I know, which is why I'll stay vigilant until we've secured Elsie's future for good." The burly man frowned, seeming to wrestle with something on his mind. Finally, he spoke up in a low, conspiratorial tone. "There's more. Things I've documented over the years. Videos, audio recordings, stuff that could really nail that witch to the wall in court if need be." I gaped at him in astonishment. "Videos? Of Marlene? How?" Simon's expression turned grim. "Let's just say I invested in some high-tech security cameras a while back, the kind that can see and hear for blocks." He let that ominous fact linger for a beat before continuing. "Look, I got the footage backed up somewhere safe. Could help make sure that snake never slithers near Elsie again." My head spun as I processed his bombshell admission. Part of me felt guilty about the prospect of weaponizing a neighbor's surveillance data against Marlene. But after the hell she'd put my family through, I quickly shoved those qualms aside. "Thank you, Simon," I replied with grave sincerity. "I vow to use any ammunition at my disposal to protect Elsie going forward." The man grunted and gave a resolute nod. "You just say the word and I'll—" "Elsie!" Derek's panicked bellow cut our hushed conference short. He came tearing around the hedges toward us, eyes wild and chest heaving. "Marlene, she showed up out of nowhere," he sputtered, struggling to catch his breath. grabbed Elsie and is trying to take her somewhere." "What?" I shot to my feet, blood draining from my face. Oh God, no. Simon was already in motion, bolting for his back door. "Stay here. I'll get the van." As Derek collapsed in a heap on the patio, I felt the winds of battle whipping up once again. Marlene was far from finished, and so was my fight to save Elsie's future. By the time Simon screeched his van into Derek's driveway, I had already sprung into frantic motion. I burst through the front door, Derek hot on my heels, and began a desperate search for any signs of my missing granddaughter. "Elsie?" I called out in a strained, quavering voice. "Elsie, where are you?" No response except the faint rustle of leaves fluttering outside an open window. Fear gripped me in icy talons as visions of Marlene's twisted revenge played out in lurid detail in my mind's eye. "She came out of nowhere," Derek kept repeating in a daze, his face drained of color. "Just appeared like a ghost and grabbed Elsie before I could react." Simon brushed past us both, his jaw set in grim determination. "I'm calling the cops. She couldn't have gotten far with a kid in tow." But I knew better than to underestimate the lengths Marlene would go to hold on to her warped ambitions. My heart thundered to a staccato beat of pure rage and dread as I tore through the house, hunting any clue to where that psychotic woman had fled with my Elsie. Finally, a tiny voice reached my ears from the direction of the living room. A voice so pitiful and broken that it froze the blood in my veins. "Grandma." I wheeled around, following the sound to a closet door left ajar. Summoning every ounce of my courage, I pulled it open to find a horrific sight. Elsie, crumpled in a trembling heap, one hand bound with rope to the metal rack above, her eyes brimmed with a haunted mixture of terror and pleading as her lips formed the words again. "Grandma, help!" "Elsie!" I cried out, quickly untying the knot and scooping her frail body into my arms. "Oh, honey, what did that monster do to you?" "Mother?" She whimpered, clinging to me with desperation. She said he couldn't leave until I was perfect." My heart sank in revulsion as fitful glimpses of what Marlene had put this poor child through flashed across my mind's eye. Clutching Elsie tighter, I spun to see Derek and Simon staring at us with twin masks of horror. "We have to get out of here." I clutched Elsie fiercely to my chest. "Simon, we need to hide somewhere until the authorities get that woman." My neighbor gave a curt nod and reached for his cell phone, but before he could punch in the first digit, a malevolent voice sliced through the tension like a razor. "Oh, I don't think so, Mother." Marlene emerged from the shadows in the hallway behind us, her feral gaze boring into mine with psychotic intensity. In her hand she gripped a wicked-looking blade, its serrated edge glinting with sick menace. "One more step," she seethed in a guttural rasp. "And I swear on all that's holy, you'll never see your precious granddaughter alive again." Ice water flooded my veins as I froze to the spot, Elsie whimpering into my shoulder like a frightened mouse. Derek lunged with futile rage, but Marlene casually swatted him aside with a dismissive backhand. "Stay down, you simpering fool," she spat, her voice dripping with unbridled contempt. "This is what happens when you let bleeding heart sentiments cloud your judgment." With a deep, shuddering breath, I hugged Elsie as close as I could and faced my deranged daughter-in-law. "Whatever you want, Marlene. Please, just don't hurt her. Haven't you put her through enough torment?" Something shifted in those hateful eyes. A bitter, twisted smile split her features as she let out a grating chuckle that raised the hairs on my neck. "Torment? You think this is about torment?" Marlene's free hand clutched her chest in a pantomime of tortured anguish. This was her salvation, her one chance to claw past the curse of mediocrity that afflicts our bloodline. She took a jerking step closer, pressing the cold steel against my cheek, its razor edge biting my flesh. I held my ground, staring her down as Elsie sobbed into my neck. "I gave her the gift you were never strong enough to give Derek," Marlene hissed through gritted teeth. "The gift of my relentless drive, my burning ambition, a righteous obsession, to escape the shackles of a meaningless, forgotten existence." A solitary tear traced down her cheek as her impassioned tirade reached its crescendo. "But you had to defile that sacred commitment, didn't you? Poisoning her mind with your sickening, weak-willed compassion." She pulled the blade away and took a lurching step backwards, her whole body quivering. I watched in mute horror as the woman teetered on the edge of total madness, for my own fear rendered insignificant next to the safety of my granddaughter. In that suspended moment, Elsie lifted her head and met my gaze with luminous, imploring eyes. Without a single word, that child conveyed everything I needed to hear in that soul-rending stare. The torment, the deprivation, the shredding of all joy and hope and identity inflicted by her own mother's callous obsession. I didn't hesitate. Gathering my courage, I thrust Elsie into Derek's arms and turned to face Marlene squarely. "Get out!" The demented woman blinked, her tirade fading into sheer dumbfounded rage. "What did you say to me?" "You heard me," I bellowed, taking a bold step forward. "I want you out of my family's life once and for all. Your poison has done enough damage, you deranged witch." Marlene's mouth contorted into a hideous sneer. "The damage is only beginning, you meddling old crone." She lunged with feral abandon, swinging the blade in a vicious horizontal arc. I ducked just in time, reeling backwards as the razor-sharp edge sliced through the air where my neck had been. "Mom?" Derek launched himself at Marlene with a guttural roar, but she swatted him away like a fly. The blade planted itself into the wall as she wrestled him to the ground. "You're as pathetic as she says." Marlene spat, raining blows down on Derek's head. "Just a sad, useless shell of a man." I acted on pure instinct. Grabbing an antique globe from the end table, I wound up and swung the heavy orb squarely at the back of Marlene's skull. It connected with a sickening crunch, sending her sprawling to the side. My chest heaved with exertion as I glared down at the crumpled, barely conscious heap that had once been my daughter-in-law. "Somebody get the authorities on the line," I rasped, spitting out the words like daggers. "Before I do something we'll all regret." A dismal, haunting silence swallowed us all. The battle for Elsie's soul had reached its bloody culmination, but at what cost? When the police finally arrived, the scene must have painted a ghastly picture of domestic carnage. Derek slumped against the wall, semi-conscious and spattered with blood. Marlene bound with zip ties and muttering incoherently on the floor. And me, Lorraine Ellis, clutching my sobbing granddaughter with a vice-like grip as the madness of the past few hours finally caught up to all of us. The officers had to practically pry Elsie from my arms to assess her condition. As they loaded Marlene into the back of their cruiser like a rabid animal, she let out one final tortured howl that sent chills down my spine. "You'll all be forgotten," she screeched, writhing against her restraints. Nameless vagrants wasting away in the gutter with the rest of the talentless nobodies. Then she was gone, like a living nightmare being hauled away. But her lingering malice hung over us all with palpable dread. What now? Where did we go from this point? Over the next few days, the fallout from Marlene's explosive unraveling rippled through our quiet community in waves. Derek resolved to take an extended leave of absence from work to be with Elsie and enter family therapy to process the trauma. Meanwhile, Marlene faced a firestorm of legal troubles. Her assault charges were compounded by allegations of child abuse and imprisonment uncovered during the investigation. The judge ultimately ruled that she should undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation and counseling to determine the threat she posed to her own daughter. Perhaps the most shocking development was the swift and merciless backlash from our once idyllic neighborhood. Word spread like wildfire about Marlene's deranged obsession and the lengths she went to transform Elsie into a musical prodigy. Suddenly, the woman who everyone thought was just an overachieving tiger mom became persona non grata, a cautionary tale of parenthood gone horrifically wrong. People I had known for years now openly shunned me and Derek in the streets, as if the curse of Marlene's insanity might somehow rub off on us. The cruelest judgments, however, were reserved for poor Elsie. "Did you hear about the Bennett girl? What a shame, such a waste of talent." "You know her mother was grooming her for Juilliard from birth? Can you imagine the pressure? No wonder the girl cracked. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say." Though they tried to shield her, the whispers and sideways glances cut Elsie deeper than any blade. The idea that her own mother's delusional ambition had somehow indelibly stained her future potential was a shadow she couldn't escape. At least not by staying in this town much longer. It was around this time that Simon, bless his ornery heart, stepped up with a proposition. His sister happened to manage a ranch in a remote part of Montana where Derek and Elsie could live off the grid for as long as they needed to heal. A chance to make a clean break and start totally anew. Though I longed for them to stay nearby, I knew it was the wisest path forward. So with a heavy heart, I began making preparations to send my loved ones off to greener pastures, far from the toxic legacy Marlene had bequeathed to us all. As I stood in the driveway hugging Elsie goodbye, I fought back hot tears. This wasn't a McKenna family tradition I ever wanted to repeat, watching the next generation flee their trauma to find hope elsewhere. But if that's what it took to free my granddaughter from the shackles of her mother's madness, then so be it. No sacrifice was too great to redeem Elsie's shattered spirit. "I love you, sweetheart," I whispered, cradling her face in my hands. Her vacant eyes glistened with a lifetime's worth of hurt and confusion. "No matter where life takes you, I'll always be here when you need me." She nodded wordlessly, shuffling toward the waiting truck. As the engine sputtered to life and they pulled away, I felt a profound sense of resolution wash over me. By sheer grit and the grace of heaven itself, I had kept my vow. Marlene's toxic reign of terror had ended. All that remained was to help Elsie rediscover the joy that had been so cruelly robbed from her childhood. With Derek and Elsie securely on their way to a fresh start in Montana, I steeled myself for the battles still to come. Though Marlene was behind bars awaiting her fate, I knew a vile woman like her wouldn't go down without an explosive fight. My prediction proved correct when Marlene's preliminary hearing kicked off a firestorm of sensationalist media coverage. Overnight, our sleepy suburb found itself thrust into the national spotlight as armchair pundits and sanctimommies engaged in a fervent public debate. This tiger mom obviously took her parenting approach too far. Are we really going to start jailing mothers for being too demanding of their children's potential? If she genuinely believed she was doing what was best for her kid, where do we draw the line between strict and psychotic? The furor reached stratospheric heights when excerpts from Marlene's psych evaluation leaked, revealing the true pathological depths of her delusions. Her obsession with transforming Elsie into a musical superstar was rooted in unresolved trauma from her own childhood. Marlene had been bred from birth as the heir to her mother's musical legacy, just another link in the chain to perpetuate a dynastic myth of artistic supremacy. But when she failed to live up to those impossible expectations, her family swiftly discarded her like so much disposable trash. For years she drifted rudderless, grasping for any sense of purpose or belonging. Then Elsie was born, and Marlene saw her chance to resurrect the crushed dreams of her own youth, to finally seize the validation and reverence that had been mercilessly denied to her. Having a child unlocked the floodgates to all her repressed psychoses. But it also amplified the warped principles seared into her psyche from an early age, namely, that perfection and greatness transcend any moral considerations of personal well-being. To Marlene, sacrificing her own child's independence and identity on the altar of achievement wasn't just acceptable, it was a sacred obligation that no casual parent could ever truly grasp. As her disturbing manifesto played out on every news channel and social media feed, the collective outrage only swelled in intensity. Suddenly, Marlene wasn't just emblematic of overbearing parental zeal run amok. She was the very embodiment of sadistic narcissism taken to its ugly extreme. No one exemplified that backlash more than Marlene's own family, the very architects of her childhood torment. In a bombshell interview, her estranged father stepped forward to denounce his daughter's unforgivable atrocities. His words were as chilling as they were damning. "We gave Marlene every opportunity for greatness. Tutors, training camps, the finest facilities, anything to cultivate the talent she proved deficient in harnessing. When she failed us despite those privileges, we were forced to cut her loose in disgrace. How she's chosen to inflict that same misery upon an innocent child only proves she learned nothing from the mistakes of her coddled upbringing." In a dark twist of symmetry, Marlene now found herself utterly disowned by the vicious legacy she had so desperately craved. Her ambitions atomized in the face of a jury's unsparing judgment. Guilty. Guilty on charges of child abuse, false imprisonment, and criminal endangerment. The prosecutor's summation cast Marlene as a raving Medea, willing to commit unspeakable atrocities to satisfy her delusional hunger for vicarious glory. As the guilty verdict was read, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for the broken, hollowed-out soul shuddering before the bench. In that moment, Marlene Bennett ceased being a monster and simply became pathetic, a sad mirror of how far wounded pride and self-deception can twist the human spirit. The judge showed no such leniency. After scathing federal prosecutors demanded the maximum sentence, Marlene was remanded to a secure psychiatric facility for the next 10 to 20 years, pending mandatory therapy and observation to determine if she still posed a threat to herself and others once her debt to society was paid. It was a fate worse than any conventional prison could inflict. Marlene would be chemically neutered, cauterized of any agency to stoke her warped aspirations of glory, left to rot in an anonymous limbo, drained of the delirious fuel that allowed her grandiose sense of purpose to metastasize in the first place. Yet as the disgraced woman was led away in shackles, her final act shocked even me. Straining against the grip of her escorting officers, Marlene locked her wild eyes onto mine from across the courtroom gallery. "This isn't over, you smug old harpy," she shrieked with unhinged fury. "Your family will be forgotten in mediocrity and failure just like mine. Mark my words." The outburst earned her a sharp blow to the gut that doubled her over. But even then, her hateful glare remained locked onto me with unsettling intensity, as if issuing an unspoken curse that no prison could ever contain. I had won this battle, saved Elsie from her mother's noxious grip. But at what cost? Though Marlene was in custody, the scars of her abuse would take years to heal, perhaps even spanning generations. With a weary sigh and a heavy heart, I left the carnage of the courtroom behind and set my sights forward. My family's road to recovery was just beginning, after all. The following months passed by in a disorienting whirlwind. With Marlene locked away and Derek dedicated to rebuilding his life with Elsie out west, I was left to pick up the scattered pieces of our shattered existence back home. It wasn't easy. Despite the urban legends that now swirled about the horrors that unfolded under my own roof, the fact remained that most folks still saw me as the well-meaning oldster whose granddaughter was simply collateral damage to her mother's insanity. In other words, pity mixed with more than a hint of disdainful gossip became the brand our family wore like a scarlet letter around town. Grocery clerks who had known me for decades suddenly went cold and aloof. Neighbors stopped waving from across the street. Even Simon retreated behind the isolating walls of his run-down bachelor pad. I understood their reticence, of course. Proximity to the macabre incidents of Marlene's unmaking had become radioactive by association. Still, the loneliness haunted my daily existence like a lingering malaise, with my only haven coming from the occasional phone call giving meager updates on Elsie and Derek's progress out in Montana. "She still won't utter a single word," Derek confided during one such heart-wrenching chat. "Hasn't drawn anything or even cracked a smile since we arrived. It's like part of her soul remains trapped back in that house of horrors." My heart ached for the burdens those two carried, even separated from the source of their strife. I vowed to help them both keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how treacherous the path ahead might seem. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, some 6 months after their departure, an unexpected miracle arrived at my doorstep. It was a plain manila envelope, unstamped, likely hand-delivered by a local mail carrier. My name scrawled across the front in childlike penmanship that instantly made my heart skip a beat. Elsie. With trembling hands, I tore open the clasp and upended the contents onto my kitchen counter. What spilled out was a drawing. A meticulously detailed pencil sketch of a young woman with sunken eyes, hollowed cheeks, and a beatific smile tugging at the edges of her lips. At first glance, I didn't recognize the gaunt, haunted visage staring back at me from the page, but as my eyes roamed the delicate strokes of graphite that composed her wispy brown hair, the faded floral print of her frayed house dress, a sob hitched in my throat. It was me. My own weary face rendered with soul-lancing tenderness and empathy through the prism of Elsie's wounded psyche. Fresh tears sprang anew when I finally registered the tiny words etched into the bottom corner of the picture. My savior. That was the spark I needed to energize me back into productive motion for the first time in months. If this heartfelt gesture was any indication, then Elsie's once vibrant spirit was finally stirring back to life out there on that distant ranch. That very night, I sprang into a whirlwind of activity, arranging travel plans and logistics for an extended trip to visit them both over the winter holidays. No more fragmentary phone calls or letters would suffice to track my granddaughter's step-by-step recovery. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to hold her renewed joy in my arms. The weeks blurred together like frames of an old home movie reel as my departure date steadily approached. Before I knew it, I stood bundled on the windswept front porch, suitcase in hand, and greeted by the grinning, rosy-cheeked face of Simon. "You didn't think I was going to let you make that whole trek alone, did ya?" The gruff loner smiled from beneath his faded cap before nodding toward the battered Ford idling at the curb. "Now come on. Nothing but wide-open road between here and there." My heart swelled with profound gratitude for my newfound friend's enduring devotion. After exchanging a teary hug, I hurried to join him for the long journey toward healing and rebirth. Glancing back at the battered facade of the house one final time, I felt the shadows of old torments recede like a long, fitful nightmare, finally slipping away. Though formidable challenges still lay ahead, the glimmer of hope that Elsie had rediscovered her fighting spirit was the balm I needed to carry on. No matter how long it took, no matter what hurdles arose, I would be there for her restoration. The guardian she needed to guide her back into the warm light of joy and self-discovery. This time, permanently freed from the shackles of her mother's poisonous ambition. With Simon's van, now bound for the winding roads of deliverance, I allowed my spirit to soar ahead with the winds of optimism and renewal. My mission had reached its apex, and the rays of a new dawn beckoned on the horizon. Elsie's torment was over. At long last, the cycle was broken.